That's important, to really understand the social development of society from the primitive communal all the way up to socialism, then to what we aspire to achieve globally, which is communism. Okay. Now the focus again was on production as the means through which we become educated, we learn things, we know things. Because the fundamental issue that Mao was dealing with in this article is the relationship between knowledge and practice. And he begins the article talking about the three foundational things that form the basis of what we know, how we know, what we learn. And the primary thing was our relationship in production, which was economic relations. And the economic relations is what form the foundation of each one of the stages of society as they've evolved from the primitive communal all the way through to socialism and projected into the future, communism. Okay, so from that, within production and what grows from production is the development of scientific study and analysis and also class struggle. And these are the other two components that he was discussing that form how we know and what we understand in our practice. So class struggle grows out of the various forms of society that I was just talking about, because once you move from the primitive communal where everybody owned and controlled the social wealth, which is the goods that are produced for human consumption, food, clothing, shelter. This is owned collectively in the oldest and most primitive forms of society. There was no class that dominated and controlled everybody else and exploited everybody for its own personal profit or its own personal power. So you had, that's why they called it primitive communalism or primitive communism, because everybody was respected the same. They had equal level of power in society. They all contributed equally to the political power in society, decision making in society, and wealth was distributed equally amongst everybody. So class struggle developed when we moved into some of the later stages of the primitive communal society, when we started to move from what were, in some cases, elders' councils, or where you had a collective leadership that was composed of a group of elders which spoke through a head elders, which is similar to what the chairperson is in a vanguard party. They were the person who spoke once the elders council sat in session and discussed issues related to the society and certain decisions that would be made, or say they were going to migrate to a new area, or they were going to change certain things or certain customs in the society, what have you. When they would meet collectively, and the chief elder would be the person who would speak to the remainder of the community what the elders council decided collectively. So from there, they developed what were called hereditary chiefs. And there's a distinction between a head elder and a chief. A chief was somebody who evolved in the later stages of the communal society and into village societies, and their position was hereditary. They would, through the evolution of society, develop a special band of soldiers or warriors around themselves. They would develop a certain mythology around their rulership, like they had a connection to the gods, or the gods spoke to them, or they had a special connection to nature that gave them preferential status or more prestige than anybody else in the society, except maybe the medicine man or the healer or the shaman, as they call them in native societies, or the primitive African societies. And they were able to create a certain mythology around themselves that caused them to be more exalted than other people. So they were able to develop a hereditary lineage that only passed down rulership or chieftain to their offspring. So it was a hereditary process as opposed to in the older societies where you had the village elders. They would elect their leadership. They would choose their leadership based on respectability, earned respect, proven wisdom, etc. In the context of a village that was organized around a chief, they would pass down their leadership through their lineage or their line, the sons or that they would have through marriage or through relations with the women in the society. So this is when the elements of class society started to develop. And from that, you would have the slave owner societies where one village could raid another village, take their women and children and enslave them, kill the men, or, decimate the men. And they would rule through the chief. And as the chiefdoms evolved, these became nobles. They would become people who claimed that they had a right to rule by divine right, by godhood. They would create a religion and a mythology that reinforced the concept of a single ruler, which is how you came up with the monotheistic religion. They patterned the whole.
You have 1 minute remaining.
They patterned or they duplicated the concept of what they called the deity after their king, or the image of a king, a jealous ruler that didn't tolerate you worshiping anybody else or ruling anybody else. They would create a whole priest class or a religious body and doctrine around their rulership and the God that gave them the right to rule. And they would force the peasants to work on land that they didn't own, but they had to pay taxes on, to give to the chief, or in the case of the king or the nobles, or their lesser lords. And this is how feudalism evolved. So you had a struggle between the classes that would evolve, between the peasants. As they engaged in their labor, their struggles, they became conscious that they were exploited. They were being abused by particularly, in some cases, a particularly tyrannical ruler, in some cases not so tyrannical. But they recognized that they were being exploited, and they would rise up, organize, and fight back. Sometimes they would overthrow a monarch, but another monarch would end up ultimately.
Thank you for using GTL.
All right, well done.
Okay, just real quickly. So what I was trying to engage on is the development of class struggle, which is the struggle between those who are oppressed by those who, in the evolution of society, took control of the wealth and power and exploited the masses for their own personal gain and wealth domination, etc. And class struggle evolved as the fight between the primarily working class of people who did most of the productive work that produced the goods in society, and those who dominated them. So in that struggle, that is where a lot of the also knowledge that people developed about their understanding of society and the limitations of their understanding of society came from, because it evolved through their efforts to resist being dominated and oppressed by a small group of people, and their understanding of what their relationships were in that stage of society in their struggle. So from that, I want to kind of move into how we form, our understanding based on these different elements of development of society and the core foundational issues in society, which is productive relations, class struggle, and also scientific knowledge, which we'll get into in a little bit. But what do you all understand to be, in our experience of society overall and our practice from day to day, to be indirect experience and direct experience?